My name is Katie Crysdale. Thank you so much to the Pool and Hot Tub Council of Canada for inviting me to talk about commercial pools this morning. It's really important to give people a perspective on commercial pools and understand kind of how they're different from the residential industry. So my plan this morning is I'm going to be running through a short PowerPoint. We're going to be looking at some common pain points in commercial pool operations. So the title of this session is going to be Short-Term Gain and Long-Term Pain, Common Shortcuts in Commercial Pool Operations. I'll be presenting for approximately 45 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for any questions. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Crysdale. I grew up in Ontario. I was working in the aquatics industry there until about 2013. When I say the aquatics industry, that comprises all of the aspects of commercial pool operations. So I started out as a lifeguard, worked my way up to facility supervisor at large commercial pools in the Toronto area. I moved out to Alberta about 8 years ago and was working in commercial pool operations as an aquatic facility manager for municipalities. I've always been passionate about pool operations from the first time at my very first pool when I was working a Friday night shift and the main circulation pump just failed. And that has become a theme for many of us in aquatics in the swimming pool industry. Things break, we don't necessarily understand the mechanical. We have to learn how things operate. And those are things that we learn as we go. So in the last couple years, I started my own business, which is called Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. And the goal is that we work with commercial swimming pool clients across Canada and internationally to address their pain points. So as we're going to see, commercial swimming pools are quite a bit different from those of you who may be working in the residential industry, those of you doing service perhaps on smaller facilities. And the commercial pool industry is really very large facilities at many different organization levels. And so they have unique challenges both when it comes to pool operations as well as when it comes to management and life cycle planning, different things like that. So my business, Lakeview Aquatic Consultants, we work with a variety of commercial properties, and I am also a certified pool operator instructor with the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, which some of you might remember as the National Swimming Pool Foundation. The Pool and Hot Tub Alliance was the merger of the National Swimming Pool Foundation and the Association of Pool and Spa Professionals back in 2019. So let's jump right into the content. What I want to talk about today really is common shortcuts that I see. And some of these shortcuts are from a perspective of an accident. Many people who are working in commercial pool operations, they may not have ended up there intentionally. So when I say commercial pool operations, we need to expand our horizon beyond just the municipal pools in our community. So when I say commercial pool clients, it's not just the city or the town's outdoor or indoor swimming pool. There are a variety of commercial client types that you might encounter if you're working in the aquatic industry. So the swimming pool industry, we have a mix of people. So we have builders, we have service technicians, we have lifeguards, we have facility managers. But then we also need to understand where these pools are located and the organizations that support or sponsor these swimming pools. So I've listed a few here on the screen. Those types of commercial clients are the government, I've mentioned, the nonprofits. So you might be familiar with in your community, the YMCA, JCCs, Jewish community centers, Boys and Girls Club across Canada. Education and hospitality are going to be the biggest sectors that I typically see. So hospitality is going to be all of your hotel brands, right from a small bed and breakfast run by a couple in your community all the way up to the biggest property. So a 500 or 700 room resort complex or a hotel at the airport. There's a large variety within hospitality. So what we're saying with the post-secondary education, that could be universities, that could be colleges, technical colleges. Increasingly, we are also seeing private high schools even have commercial swimming pools. And when I say commercial swimming pool, that is a commercial pool because of the nature of the way the pool is inspected by the province or the county or the state. The region is governing the administration of that swimming pool because it is a public facility used by more than just one family. So that is something that might be new for those of you who are still focused primarily on residential and who are working towards getting your first commercial property or your first commercial client, is that the expectations are going to be quite different and the requirements are going to be a lot stricter when it comes to the administration of commercial properties because they are regulated and publicly inspected. Property management, that one's pretty self-explanatory, but with many urban areas, large cities, for example, the city of Toronto, condo buildings are a dime a dozen, and the swimming pool in a condo building does need to be maintained. So that could be the condo board or the property management firm directly on site, or that could be an off-site service technician or company that is providing support there. Health and fitness. So some of the big chains, such as Good Life Fitness, are getting into swimming pools as part of their amenities. Military. So in Ontario and across Canada, we have military bases, both Air Force, Navy, and Army. Campgrounds. So your outdoor summer campgrounds that thinking more typically RV resorts that have swimming pools. And then your summer camps and swim schools. So one of the things I hope you consider as we go through this presentation is that when we talk commercial pools, it's not just one big pool in the community. It's not just the municipality. Commercial pools exist everywhere in the area that you work, and it's important to consider that there's different challenges faced by each. So the challenges at a college, a post-secondary education institution, are going to be quite different from those at a hotel or those at a swim school. And we're not going to be talking about the COVID pandemic in this session in great detail, but that is also a piece that does apply when we think about our commercial pools. So types of aquatic facilities is also going to be relevant to our discussion about frequent mistakes or frequent shortcuts that are taken in pool operations. So as I mentioned earlier, often in those commercial properties, you have individuals who end up managing or operating the swimming pool who may not have as much experience as somebody who works directly in the swimming pool industry as a builder or a service technician. And so it's important to understand that when we are either supporting those clients or taking on contracts with those clients, they're going to have unique pain points. They don't have a ton of experience necessarily. They don't have a ton of background in the work. And they're also going to be challenged by the fact that you have a large, diverse selection of amenities, aquatic amenities in these properties. Basically, in your residential pool, you have the pool in the backyard, typically in ground, maybe above ground. It lacks automation, it lacks controls for pool chemicals. In the commercial swimming pool industry, we're always assuming automation. That's a requirement in most locations across Canada. And there's often more than just one pool. There may be a lap pool, there may also be a hot tub, a water slide, spray parks and splash pads, water slides. The variety of infrastructure is going to be significantly different in our commercial pools as well. And so if you've primarily worked in residential, this is also something to be aware of when you're going to bid or work with your first commercial client. They're going to have very, very different concerns about service delivery being open to the public, being available to members or to guests. And it's going to be quite a bit different from one household not having access to their backyard pool for one day or several days. So one of the things that informs this talk is I'm talking about a large variety of swimming pools across Canada and to some degree as well the United States. So the different pain points that we're going to be looking at in relation to the shortcuts that I frequently see pool operators make is as the result of visiting multiple aquatic facilities across Canada. So I'm based near Calgary, Alberta in Western Canada. I am very familiar with all of the pools around me in the province of Alberta from top to bottom, as well as visiting pools in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, BC, and Ontario, where I grew up. The biggest thing I'm going to be sharing in this session is that the problems and the challenges that pool operators face, or service technicians who take on a commercial client, are very much the same across the board. There are certain trends that I'm going to be identifying in this presentation in terms of the most frequently seen gaps. And those gaps do not come from a place of bad intentions. They frequently come from a lack of knowledge. And that was the goal with this presentation, is identifying the several areas that I routinely see again and again and again as shortcuts that have devastating financial impact. So you're going to be looking at the individual factors that I present, and you could consider, do they apply to me? Do they apply to my facility? Do they apply to my client? And they may not. But these are often things that I see identified across the spectrum. It's not a specific practice in one region, it's across Canada. And the map you're looking at is, I've started tracking the pools that I've actually been to. I'm trying to think now. So 2020 was the pandemic. So I only got to about 25 pools last year that were new to me. 2019, I got to almost 100 swimming pools in Canada that I hadn't previously visited. And so that informs a lot of this talk. So what we're looking at here are shortcuts. As I was suggesting earlier, people don't intentionally take shortcuts that they know to be expensive long term. Typically, we've all been in a situation where a client doesn't want to pay for the appropriate equipment or the appropriate service, or our manager or our boss doesn't want to authorize the full replacement cost, or they'd like a temporary fix, or we don't have the time to do this every day, or we should do it this way now, but we'll change it later. I call that, shortcuts of omission, right? They're not typically intentional shortcuts, but sometimes there are also going to be shortcuts of commission, right? So thinking as you go through this session, what are some of the things that maybe I don't think too hard about what I do at the pool or what I do with this client? Are there any ways that I'm not doing the best that I could be with the maintenance and the care of the pool? Because commercial swimming pools are very expensive assets. This is something that you really need to consider if you are moving into commercial pool operations or you want to take on a commercial client. Commercial swimming pools could cost anywhere from $500,000 to $75 million. And so the replacement cost on a circulation pump, for example, a 1 or 2 horsepower circulation pump in a residential pool might be less than $2,000 installed. Meanwhile, the circulation pump at a 25-meter pool in the community center might be 20 to 40 horsepower, depending on the function in the basin, right? And we're talking tens of thousands of dollars replacement cost. So really thinking as we go through this session, what are going to be the costs with these shortcuts? So we're going to be going through 7 different shortcuts. I will also let you know that the photographs that you've been seeing on the slides, those are photographs that I have taken visiting different pools. So I'm a huge fan of Instagram and tracking the pools that I go and visit. So a lot of these photos and topics are coming up as the result of visiting different clients. So whether that is past certified pool operator students, whether that's municipal clients, commercial clients, etc. So the number one, by and large, the number one biggest in terms of cost and frequency shortcut that I see in commercial pool operations is not understanding calcium. Calcium needs to exist in water for many different types of swimming pool basins. So you may have a tile basin, you may have a cement basin, you may have a vinyl or a membrane, you may have stainless steel, epoxy. There are many different pool finishes, and not all pool finishes do require calcium. However, this is the most frequent shortcut I see because somebody transfers to a tile pool and they don't realize we need to watch the calcium in a pool. So when you have a tile pool, if the water is not balanced for calcium, we tend to know of our water as hard or soft. If it's not balanced with calcium, the water is going to be aggressive. And what you can see here in the photo, this was a pool I visited in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan back in September. This was a hotel. And because the water is aggressive over time, the calcium is not balanced. The water is looking for a source of calcium to feed its hunger. And so it's grabbing the grout from behind the tiles. And over time, this is not a one-day mistake. This is progressively over months and years that a low level of calcium is going to cause the tiles to fall off and could potentially also contribute to a failure of waterproofing of the entire basin, depending on the situation. So calcium is often not monitored by many pool operators because it is not regulated provincially. Most Canadian provinces in the commercial pool operator regulations that you must follow for commercial pools. You don't have anything you have to follow with residential pools, but with commercial public pools, each province in Canada regulates the minimum levels of chemicals. Calcium is something that is not regulated because it's not required for all basins. For example, if you have a vinyl liner or a membrane or acrylic, you don't need to worry about calcium necessarily. But calcium is vital when it comes to our more expensive tile and cement pools. Some of you will also be familiar with calcium effects that you've seen, so levels in your pools in terms of effects on filters or pipes if you are using a calcium-based source of chlorine. So one type of chlorine you may have encountered is calcium hypochlorite, right? Cal hypo, and it's got calcium in the formulation. And so that is going to contribute to your calcium level in the pool. So at a minimum, you need to check your calcium levels, whether it's daily, couple times a week, you do need to check them. And this is across the board. The most frequent shortcut that I see across Canada is people don't even realize that they can check calcium with the reagents that are provided in most water test kits, and that it is something that they should do. So the solution to uncontrolled calcium is basically testing it. So understanding what is the calcium like in your area. So where I am in southern Alberta, the calcium is actually quite high, and that is without using a calcium-based sanitizer. So I actually need to soften my water in my home because it is quite hard. If I'm operating a commercial pool in this area, I need to be aware of that level of hard water coming into the pool, as well as how that's implicated if I use calcium hypochlorite. The other thing that you need to understand as a pool operator is that calcium levels are going to change throughout the year. This is something that many people don't know. Your municipal water treatment operators are adjusting how they treat and sanitize public drinking water throughout the year. So how they treat the water in the summer is going to be quite different from how they treat the water in the winter. And they adjust those levels based on water source. So is your city water coming from a river that goes down and becomes very, very shallow in the winter because it's frozen? Or is your municipal water being taken from a lake and it's frozen for most of the year and then it opens up in the summer? So it is important to also understand your source water. And when I say source water, that's going to be coming from the tap, going into your pool, your main water source, whether that's municipal water, well water, if you're bringing in trucked in water, etc. Okay, so basically calcium is very easily addressed by understanding what the level is in your area and then dosing accordingly. You can buy a product called calcium chloride, which is calcium flake, and easily add it to your pool as needed. It may not be a daily treatment. It may not even be a treatment if you live in an area with a high level of calcium. But the big point I'd like to make here is that probably 90% of pool operators I encounter are not ever checking pool calcium. And that is something that is an easy thing to do. With the previous screen, let me go back 1 second. I've had 2 clients do massive regrout jobs, waterproofing, because of the failure of tile. So one was a hotel in Toronto, northern Toronto, north edge of Toronto. They spent $65,000 regrouting the basin after 6 years in operation. So that was a $65,000 mistake that could have been addressed with a $50 bag of calcium that probably would have lasted 1 to 2 months. Meanwhile, in Southern Alberta, I have a client a couple of years ago, they spent $125,000 over 2 years regrouting a 25-meter pool that had not been, the calcium had not been monitored for 7 to 8 years. Okay, so something to be very aware of is that calcium is important. Another big thing that I see as a shortcut that shouldn't be a shortcut is people do not want to install, maintain, or use their flow meters. So in the residential pool industry, there may or may not be a flow meter installed on the homeowner's swimming pool. It's simply not necessary, right? There's no need to measure the flow. There's no need to measure the turnover of the swimming pool. In the commercial swimming pool industry, we do need to monitor our water flow, our water speed, because that is a vital component of compliance with the Public Health Authority, which is typically your province and sometimes your city. So City of Toronto has a health authority that supplements the province of Ontario pool regulations. Flow meters are not always required and they're not always checked after construction, after the permit has been issued. So I often see a lot of pool operators out in the field where their flow meters are broken and they haven't been replaced. Or occasionally, I do have students in the certified pool operator class who say, well, we're not required to have one, so I don't want to spend the money to install them. Not having a flow meter is essentially like driving your personal vehicle down the highway without a speedometer. You know what the posted speed limit is. You have a sense of how quickly you're driving based on the scenery passing by your window. But if the police officer pulls you over, it's not going to be acceptable to say, well, my speedometer didn't work, right? It just doesn't work that way. Same thing applies with commercial swimming pools. It's vitally important that we understand some basic health factors of our swimming pool. Water speed is going to be one of them. So I do understand that it can be tricky to install flow meters, that the way your swimming pool might be plumbed, the piping, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of places that you really do need to measure your water speed. The first is going to be on the controller. So the probe is part of the control system or the automation that is required in commercial swimming pools to dose the chemicals for the swimming pool as well as to run the circulation pump, right? So that is a component that will be required in commercial pools as opposed to residential. Biggest thing with that is if you're not monitoring your water speed, you do not know your turnover, and turnover is regulated by the individual provinces. There is a minimum turnover you must meet. The same way sometimes you will see driving on the road, there is a minimum speed you must maintain in certain areas. Absent flow meters will also contribute to not knowing if the water quality is as good as it could be because you don't know about water speed. And your overall system performance is based on all of these factors. So if your probes to your controller have the incorrect speed of water supply to the probes, right? If the probes are dancing in foaming water, they're going to give incorrect chemical readings, temperature readings, ORP readings, oxidation reduction potential readings to the controller, which is then going to create a whole snowball effect with your pool operations. Okay, so flow meters are so important. Without flow meters, you probably don't know if you have flow going through the pool in all locations. And so you could also look at all of the other locations on the system. You can install flow meters. If you're also looking at flow through the pool, you can do a dye test at some point, but day in, day out, you need to have flow meters. What is the suction going to the pump? What is the return going from the pump to the pool, as well as to the probes? Flow meters have improved a lot over the years. So if you are only familiar with flow meters that are drilled into the pipe, like a little tapped into the pipe, like a little finger with water speed, those are still available. They're still very affordable, 60, $80, and then you have to install them. But if you have difficulties with the piping in an older swimming pool, there are many, many other options now available, all the way up to $1,500 or $2,000, involving magnets and sensors. They can be electronic, they can be analog, and there's been a lot of improvements as well on flow meters, so you can apply them to locations where the piping is not a straight run necessarily. So the recommendation for flow meters is going to be at least 4 lengths the diameter of a pipe. So if we're talking a 4-inch pipe, we're talking 16 inches to get a straight run. However, there are options now. If your plumbing does not allow for that, you can look at some more expensive flow meters that would regulate or would read the water appropriately. And so having a flow meter is going to make your job a lot easier as a commercial pool operator, or if you're servicing a commercial client, because the number one question the health inspector ever asked me when I was the aquatic facility manager and I had, twice a year annual inspections is, what is your flow rate? And are you meeting the required turnover rate for this property based on age and building code? Residential pool construction, after you hand it over, nobody necessarily cares what the flow rate is. Turnover rate and flow are vital in commercial pools, and many clients I've worked with have been caught flat-footed when they discover too late that their pump was dying, the impeller needed to be replaced, or suction fittings were plugged. Because they didn't have a sense of flow, they weren't tracking the flow every single day to see it trending up or trending down. Third of 7 key mistakes or shortcuts that I see commercial operators make that have devastating financial consequences is with regards to water balance. So, water needs to be balanced in such a way that it is safe for the customers who are swimming in the water, as well as safe for the mechanical equipment. This is also a consideration that more beginner pool operators don't necessarily think about. There is a tendency to over focus on chlorine and pH as the most significant factors of water chemistry, right? Chlorine does the disinfecting, pH makes the chlorine efficient and keeps the customer's skin feeling soft. That is where some pool operators or service technicians stop. When we're talking about a $30 million swimming pool or even a $1 million swimming pool, right? Because I don't want to use my insurance policy to replace my client's swimming pool. We need to be aware of water balance and the other factors at play in water balance. And that is because if we are not reconciling between what we have to have for provincial compliance, what we have to have for mechanical warranty, what we have to have for our customers and public safety, we can make a mistake and fall out of range and cause damage like this client did here. So this client opened a small pool and they blew through this heater in 9 months. And that was because of not monitoring, amongst other things, their water balance. It was consistently outside of the recommended range for warranty. And so they could not get this item warranted because they did not follow the manufacturer's operating recommendations. So what is water balance? So water balance is comprised of 5 factors. It's often known as the Langelier saturation index. And if you've never heard the term water balance before, you may want to consider taking a water chemistry course or the certified pool operator course. So Mr. Langelier in the 1920s, he came up with this concept of water balance, and it includes 5 factors to monitor. So those 5 factors are listed on the screen. The first one is pH, second is temperature, third is calcium, fourth is alkalinity, and the fifth is total dissolved solids. So if you take a water chemistry course, we talk about water balance in great detail. We look at each individual factor and how they work together. Some of those factors are going to be chemical, some of those factors are going to be physical, but we need to keep a certain level of balance for the long-term health and safety of the hardware. So the biggest thing to understand with commercial pools is we do expect them to last for 20, 30, 40 years. The residential homeowner might not be so upset, let's say, if their pool after 10 years, they have to do significant maintenance. But if you build in a community a $30 million pool and 10 years down the road, you have to go to the mayor and council and say, excuse me, we need to replace our pool heater for $400,000. they're not going to be impressed. That is legacy infrastructure that should be lasting for 20 and 30 and maybe 40 years. So it's important to understand water balance, how it works. I can't get into too great detail right now, but it's saying that this is something that you should be considering as a pool operator when you're looking at your ranges. So you'll notice chlorine is not a factor of water balance. It is an outlier, but that doesn't mean we ignore it. We still maintain the right level of chlorine as required by our province or our county or our state for the pool to be safe. It just makes the pool operator or service technician's job harder because they have to mediate between all of these competing interests. So the question that Chris asked a little bit earlier was regarding calcium, but it does apply to all of these water-related topics. So Chris asked, should we test the water before filling an empty pool? Yes, absolutely. And I would also say that you should also be testing the water where you live or where you work on a regular basis. So that doesn't mean that I test the water coming out of my faucet every day, but maybe every couple of months I am checking what the water levels are, because I know in my town, we get our water from the city of Calgary. There are dramatic fluctuations in the TDS, total dissolved solids, in the calcium levels, and in other things such as phosphates or nitrates throughout the year. So anytime you are doing a significant drain and refill, maybe even, a 50%, a partial drain, it's very important to understand the water where you're located. And if you have a wide geographic area as well that you service, let's say, you go anywhere from 200, 300, 400 kilometers in one direction or another, it is really critical that you check the water on the site of the client you are working with before you start. Because even in Ontario, I can give the example that water in downtown Toronto is vastly different from Kingston. And you would think, well, that's only 2.5, 3 hours away, but the water sources are completely different, right? Where it's coming in on Lake Ontario, how it's being treated. And so we can never assume that water quality is the same. pH in the city of Kingston is close to 7.7. pH in downtown Toronto, 7.4, right? So it's vital to understand what is the base water you're starting with in all of these applications. Great question. Moving on, a couple more to go. So number 4, in terms of shortcuts that I consistently see as somebody who's visiting these commercial swimming pools is uncontrolled total dissolved solids. So total dissolved solids is a measure of everything that goes into the water. One of the things we talk about in the certified pool operator course or whenever I'm training clients is it's important to understand how swimming pools work. So chlorine will disinfect germs. And in certain cases, the chlorine can help to burn off or oxidize those microscopic contaminants that are in the water. The filter in your swimming pool, it filters out larger physical debris, but there is going to be a gap often in pool operations between what can be effectively oxidized or burned off and what can be filtered out. So I have some juiced crystal water as an illustration. Right? So this is pink water. I've added flavored juice crystals. It is safe for me to drink. It tastes like a fruity flavor. A filter would be incapable of filtering out this color at the microscopic level. Chlorine in the right concentration may burn it off, but it's going to depend how effectively it oxidizes that color and that flavor. So one of the things with swimming pools that many pool operators don't understand when they make the leap to commercial pools is that water quality is one of the most important things that the owner is concerned about. If I run a community swimming pool and I am programming swimming lessons, I can only be open to the public and only make my revenue if I have good water quality. Let me show you this short clip. Is it going to work? We'll see. So what you're looking at on the screen, I'm going to pause it in just a moment. Look at this water quality. Keep running it. Keep watching this water quality. This child is in a neon yellow shirt, and I can barely see under the water through, let me pause it. There, look at the quality of that water. Why is that water cloudy? right? We can't understand everything that's going on here, but in general, when I'm out on the road visiting pools, there is a lack of willingness to throw out water, to backwash, sand filters effectively and throw out water and refresh it. So some provinces in Canada do require a certain amount of fresh water be added to the pool every day to help with total dissolved solids because we're trying to keep the water refreshed. A high level of total dissolved solids will eventually start to be visible in the water. We're going to have cloudiness, turbidity, flat water, milky water, and that's going to pose a major safety concern for your clients. Whether it's a hotel or a community pool, this is unsightly. This is not good. And the reason this matters to the pool operator is in extreme circumstances, I have even seen this destroy metal fittings. I had a client in Calgary that we used the Myron Ultra Pen to measure total dissolved solids. And we had to do a 1/4 dilution of pool water with distilled water to get a reading of over 9,000. So, what that means is that their swimming pool had total dissolved solids of over 13,000. And that was part of the reason, among several others, why they blew through 2 heaters in 18 months, as well as damage to metal fittings. The biggest challenge with TDS is that we cannot burn it off. The only way we can get rid of total dissolved solids is by draining or refreshing water. And so this is something you want to keep an eye on throughout the course of your operating season. Commercial pools may only drain once a year, once every 2 years, maybe once every 3 years if it's a 50-meter property with over 1 million liters. And so it's important that we are regularly backwashing, topping up splash out, evaporation. We are not attempting to conserve water. I do run into clients that are trying to save water money, and that ultimately leads to poor quality water, cloudy water, and eventually the health inspector will close the pool if you cannot see the bottom of the pool at the deepest location. So regularly testing TDS, there are a couple of different ways you can do it, different meters that you can purchase. You're not adjusting it, you're not worrying about it necessarily, but you're keeping an eye on it, with the goal being a range of approximately 1,500 parts per million around your startup water. And that connects it back to Chris's question. If you don't know your startup water, if you don't know the TDS of the water you are putting into that pool every day, then it's hard to guesstimate or forecast when TDS could become a safety concern as well as an operational concern. Number 5 is a big one, and some of you will have heard of this before. People do not want to replace their contaminated media, okay? This is unfortunately a big one, and I'm sure those of you in residential have seen this as well. The homeowner doesn't want to replace the cartridge filter. The homeowner doesn't want to pay for this, doesn't want to pay for that. This is also a problem in commercial swimming pools. I have had builders tell my clients that they never need to replace their sand filter. They'll last for 25 years. Well, no, you don't have to replace the filter, but you do have to replace what goes inside, which is the media. Over time, sand will become compromised. It will become either caked with calcium, it'll become a brick with sludge, basically biofilm. The photo on the bottom, the white is grass when I used to operate a spray park, and we were constantly fighting with the landscapers about using bag mowers. Cartridge filters over on the right, you can see they get moldy. DE filter up in the top, biofilm, slime, poor oxidation, right? Many of these things are things that are not considered in the operation of a commercial swimming pool. And an easy way to know if you are losing chemicals to contaminated filters is to check your water chemistry going into and coming out of the pool filter. So this is something, if you are taking on a new commercial pool as a client, you should be assessing the filter, opening it up. What does it look like? Is all of the sand there? I had one client I was working with, they opened up the filter after I suggested that the sand had been coming out the bottom through broken laterals. And there was essentially this much sand in a filter that was 10 feet tall, right? So not only can sand be missing or the media is missing, but it can also be compromised. Okay. And it's very expensive to not replace that media, which is getting back to the point on the screen. Many people think, well, it's too much work, it's too much sand to take it out and to replace it. It's far more expensive in chemical cost to be operating with filters that are compromised. So if you have one of these sludgy filters, you would be able to measure your water, right? So on the suction line coming from the pool to the filter, if you have a discharge, or you can open up the valve and get some water out, measure the chlorine coming from the pool. Then, as it goes through the filter, immediately take a sample after the filter and notice, did the chlorine level drop? Is your filter itself contaminating the system? Are you working harder, spending more money on chlorine to disinfect the filter? Right? This should not be happening. And this happens everywhere. I kid you not, everywhere I go. Filters are filthy. Okay. You can use beach sand in your filters. If they're sand, you don't need a fancy glass media. You don't need a fancy plastic media. You can go to Home Depot and you can buy beach sand. If you don't want to replace the sand itself, you don't want to replace the cartridge, you don't want to clean the DE septums, you can also degrease. So degreasing is exactly as it sounds, is buying a degreasing media that you would circulate through the sand bed, or you would circulate through the pool system, depending on how big your pool is. Bigger pools, we will not recirculate it through the basin. We will only recirculate it through the filter room or the back end loop. And we are going to be basically removing all of the slime you would find in a drain or a hair trap, right? So that it's not going to be damaging the system. I'm seeing, Rodney, your question. What do you suggest for dilution for commercial pools that use cartridge filtration? So dilution is going to be the same anywhere. If you're not going, like, you're not going to backwash a cartridge filter, obviously, but what I would recommend is routinely, whether it's once a week or twice a month, is literally just dumping water from the basin. And keep a quick eye on it. May only be 1 or 2 inches, depending on the depth of the pool. But then over the course of a couple months, then you're going to be replacing enough water that you should see an improvement. So this is also the recommendation with fish tanks. You only replace 10% a week, because then you're going to damage the chemistry for the safety of the fish. Same thing with swimming pools, just change 10% a week, or a couple inches more realistically, and you will start to notice an improvement without having a dramatic increase in your water cost. Okay. So I believe the last time I did it with a 25-meter pool, we ended up doing about a foot over 2 months, and the water bill was spread out. So I didn't get too big of a hand slap because the water quality really was an issue. The last couple points I want to make here so we can finish up. Number 6, a shortcut that I frequently see is pool operators and service technicians not diluting chemicals that they are dumping into the pool. And they are dumping them into the skimmer basket often. So it's one thing to stick a chlorine puck in a skimmer basket in a residential pool, 1 puck a week. I get that. It's another thing to be talking about a commercial swimming pool where you could be using 100 gallons of chlorine to increase the chlorine level so that it's compliant to open to the public, and dumping 100 gallons of liquid chlorine, sodium hypochlorite, directly into a skimmer that is going to the impeller and pump that's $30,000. Okay. And this is something that happens typically at the junior level, whether it's a lifeguard or the new person who's helping out. Somebody says, hey, Joey, go put the chemicals in the pool. They don't know any better, but it ultimately goes straight to the pool pump and it's not getting sufficiently dissolved. Those lines, they may be 2 inches, they may be 8 inches, but the reality is if you're pouring 100 gallons of chlorine, which I've seen in larger pools, that's what it takes. It's going straight into that hardware that is very expensive. So an extra 10 minutes to broadcast or disperse around the pool is going to be a game changer when it comes to maintaining that infrastructure lifespan. Even better would be a slurry. If you can set up a slurry pot, it's basically a tank, holding tank with a small pump or even a drill with a mixing bit. And then you can dilute your chemical in such a way that it can be fed or injected into the system at regular intervals. Most people are dumping pool chemicals in because they're in a rush. They need the pool to be compliant to open. And that is where we see a lot of this damage. And so I understand people don't want to broadcast into the basin because they're worried about the pool finish, maybe burning the liner, but burning out the pump faster or the impeller getting damaged is not any better. Okay, so chemical testing with a standardized unit is another big one. And this is the big thing with commercial pool operations versus residential. So with residential, you may be touching a pool once a week for the client contract. You're coming, you're checking the water chemistry, you're splashing the chemicals in, and you're leaving. Commercial pool operations across Canada, you are checking your water chemistry several times per day because the operating period for the swimming pool may be 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week when it's not a pandemic and pools are not closed, but 360 days per year. And so when you have multiple shifts of people working, it is critical that there is cohesion amongst the team who's doing pool operations. And that could be the junior building operator who's new, learning how to do water testing because nobody wants him doing the more expensive maintenance yet. And so then there's mistakes with water testing because of lighting. And so, especially as many of our facilities are upgrading lighting or there's grants available to improve lighting and there's no longer just incandescent, but there's a mixture of light, daylight, incandescent, LED, blue light, white light, warm lights, cool lights. It's really vital that there be standardized light sources for the testing in these commercial facilities, because I will often see that Jim in the morning is doing something very different from Sandy in the evening. You do not need to buy the expensive light source from the chemical testing companies. So Lamont and Taylor and all the big companies will want you to buy their lights. You can do that. But if you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars, you can also go to any online retailers such as Amazon or Bed Bath & Beyond and get a seasonal affective disorder light that replicates daylight. Many of the colorimetric test kits where you're color matching to an established standard are optimized for daylight. And if you have a filter room or a mechanical room that is deep underground, very rarely do they have windows or closets. It's important to spend $30 and get the right light so everybody's on the same page. Because there's often tons of inconsistencies where they're sampling as well as in how we're reading those samples. Just want to check where we were at for questions. So Rodney, if a health authority doesn't want chemicals added directly to the basin, that is a new one for me. I've never heard that before. As long as you are clearly stating that the pool is closed and there are no bathers in the water at the time that you are doing it, that should not be a concern. That is the point of contact with the customer. And so especially dispersing it so it is well mixed is going to be far more efficient in a deep, let's say 12-foot area of water, as opposed to small, trying to dump large quantities of chemical in through the Heron Lynn strainer or some other source. We're talking also with the pool chemicals about there's best practice in terms of regular dosing every day. What I was primarily speaking to, which I wasn't clear, is when we have to boost those levels to either reopen or deal with the contamination, or we've fallen below the minimum. So regularly, absolutely, we are injecting or adding chemicals through the lines, like the plumbing. But when we have to do those one-off dosings or treatments, that the basin, as long as there's no customers in the water, is going to be the best source. Whether that is slurried or mixed or not is going to depend on the finish, as you said. So yeah, I just want to finish up with some conclusions. So I mentioned 7 different areas that are frequent shortcuts that I have seen at pools across Canada. The biggest thing is that these shortcuts are very cheap now. They save time, they save a little bit of money, but they do result in significant costs, whether it's labor, time, lost revenue, infrastructure, poor reputation in the community. There's significant consequences when we take these shortcuts in commercial pool operations. that I would encourage everyone who's working on commercial pools or hopes to work on commercial pools that they really consider before they jump right into doing that. If anybody has any questions, I will keep an eye on the chat box. If you need to reach me in the future, I'm always happy to hear from anybody if they have questions, would like more information. My name is Katie Crysdale. My business is called Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. We work with the commercial swimming pool industry across Canada. I am based near Calgary, Alberta. When it's not the COVID-19 pandemic, I do typically work across Canada. I'm in Ontario 3 times a year. Right now, it's just hard to say with everything at the moment. Thanks so much, you guys. I appreciate you joining me this afternoon, this morning, depending on your time zone. Have a great rest of your week. Stay safe, stay warm.